Question 1. During the evaluation of investigative processes within the Department of Energy OIG's California Field Office, what is the most effective strategy for optimizing the workflow related to allegations of grant fraud to ensure both efficiency and thoroughness? Option A. Rapidly adopt new, cutting-edge investigative software and techniques without prior pilot testing or comprehensive training for agents. Option B. Assign the task of redesigning the entire investigative process to the newest agents in the office, assuming they will bring fresh perspectives. Option C. Conduct a detailed analysis of current investigative protocols, identify specific inefficiencies through data and agent feedback, and research best practices for investigative process optimization, ensuring alignment with Department of Energy OIG policies and federal statutes. Option D. Prioritize reducing the average time spent per case by streamlining documentation requirements and limiting the scope of evidence review. The correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed analysis of current investigative protocols, identify specific inefficiencies through data and agent feedback, and research best practices for investigative process optimization, ensuring alignment with Department of Energy OIG policies and federal statutes. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an investigator to balance the need for thoroughness and efficiency in a complex investigation involving potential misuse of federal funds. The investigator must navigate the Department of Energy's Office of Inspector General OIG policies and procedures, which emphasize integrity, objectivity, and adherence to legal and ethical standards, while also considering the practicalities of resource allocation and timely resolution. The pressure to optimize processes must not compromise the quality or completeness of the investigation. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a systematic review of existing investigative protocols and identifying specific bottlenecks or inefficiencies within the current workflow for investigating potential grant fraud in California. This includes analyzing data from past investigations, consulting with experienced agents, and researching best practices in investigative process optimization, all while ensuring strict compliance with the Department of Energy OIG's investigative manual and relevant federal statutes governing fraud and waste. This method prioritizes data-driven improvements that are directly applicable to the investigative mandate and are grounded in established OIG guidelines. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to immediately implement new, unproven technologies or methodologies without a thorough assessment of their suitability and potential impact on the existing investigative framework. This could lead to wasted resources, disruption of ongoing investigations, and potential noncompliance with OIG directives if the new methods are not properly vetted or integrated. Another incorrect approach would be to focus solely on reducing the time spent on each case without considering the potential impact on the depth and accuracy of the investigation. This could result in superficial reviews, missed evidence, and ultimately compromised findings, which would undermine the OIG's mission to detect and prevent fraud, waste, and abuse of federal funds in California. A further incorrect approach would be to delegate process optimization tasks to junior staff without adequate oversight or training in investigative best practices and OIG regulations. This could lead to the adoption of inefficient or non-compliant procedures, as well as a lack of understanding of the critical legal and ethical considerations involved in investigations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach process optimization by first understanding the current state of operations, identifying specific areas for improvement through data analysis and stakeholder consultation, and then developing and testing solutions that align with regulatory requirements and ethical obligations. A phased implementation with continuous evaluation and adaptation is crucial to ensure that optimizations enhance, rather than detract from, the effectiveness and integrity of the investigative process. Question 2. What factors determine the most effective and legally sound approach for a Department of Energy OIG special agent in California to investigate allegations of procurement fraud within a DOE-funded research institution, ensuring both the integrity of the investigation and the rights of all parties involved? Option A. An approach that relies heavily on informant tips and uncorroborated allegations to guide investigative efforts, assuming the initial information is accurate. Option B. A rapid, assertive approach focused on immediate interviews and seizure of documents to quickly identify and apprehend potential perpetrators, prioritizing speed to deter further illicit activity. Option C, an investigation that primarily targets systemic weaknesses in the institution's financial controls, with less emphasis on identifying specific individuals responsible for fraudulent actions. Option D, a systematic, evidence-based methodology that includes thorough initial assessment, meticulous planning, lawful evidence collection, and comprehensive documentation, aligning with the Inspector General Act and federal investigative standards. Correct answer is D, a systematic, evidence-based methodology that includes thorough initial assessment, meticulous planning, lawful evidence collection, and comprehensive documentation, aligning with the Inspector General Act and federal investigative standards. Explanation: the scenario presents a common challenge for Department of Energy, DOE, Office of Inspector General OIG special agents, balancing the need for efficient investigation with the imperative to uphold due process and legal standards when dealing with potential fraud, waste, and abuse within DOE programs in California. The challenge lies in identifying and mitigating risks associated with a complex, multifaceted investigation without compromising the integrity of evidence or the rights of individuals involved. Careful judgment is required to ensure that investigative actions are both effective and legally sound, adhering strictly to the principles of the Inspector General Act of 1978, as amended, and relevant federal statutes governing investigations. The best professional approach involves a systematic and evidence-based methodology that prioritizes thoroughness and adherence to established investigative protocols. This approach begins with a comprehensive assessment of the allegations, followed by meticulous planning that outlines investigative steps, resource allocation, and legal considerations. It emphasizes the collection of admissible evidence through lawful means, maintaining a clear audit trail, and ensuring that all actions are documented. This aligns with the Inspector General Act's mandate to prevent and detect fraud, waste, and abuse, and to promote economy and efficiency in DOE programs. Specifically, it upholds the principles of due process and the presumption of innocence by focusing on objective fact-finding and avoiding premature conclusions. An incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed over accuracy, leading to the premature identification of suspects or the hasty collection of evidence without proper legal authorization or documentation. This could result in the compromise of evidence, making it inadmissible in subsequent proceedings, and could lead to wrongful accusations, damaging reputations, and undermining the credibility of the OIG. Such an approach fails to adhere to the investigative standards required by federal law and OIG policy, potentially exposing the DOE and the OIG to legal challenges and public scrutiny. Another incorrect approach would be to focus solely on identifying a single perpetrator without considering systemic issues or broader patterns of misconduct that may be contributing to the problem. This narrow focus can lead to an incomplete investigation, allowing the underlying causes of fraud, waste, or abuse to persist. It neglects the OIG's responsibility to recommend improvements to DOE programs and operations to prevent future occurrences. A third incorrect approach would be to rely on unsubstantiated rumors or anecdotal information as primary evidence. While such information might serve as a starting point for an investigation, it cannot form the basis of findings or recommendations without corroborating verifiable evidence. This disregard for evidentiary standards undermines the investigative process and can lead to erroneous conclusions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the allegations and the relevant legal and regulatory landscape. This involves conducting a thorough risk assessment to identify potential investigative challenges and developing a strategic plan that outlines objectives, methodologies, and timelines. Throughout the investigation, continuous evaluation of evidence and adherence to ethical guidelines are paramount. Professionals must maintain objectivity, ensure all actions are legally defensible, and prioritize the integrity of the investigative process and the accuracy of findings. Question 3. The monitoring system demonstrates an unusual spike in electricity consumption at a Department of Energy facility located in Texas. As a special agent with the DOE Office of Inspector General, which of the following initial actions best aligns with process optimization and investigative best practices? Option A. Conduct a detailed review of the anomaly, correlating it with known operational schedules, recent maintenance activities, and prevailing weather conditions specific to the Texas region, to identify potential legitimate explanations before considering further investigative steps. Option B. Immediately launch a comprehensive forensic audit of all energy-related expenditures and operational logs for the past fiscal year to uncover any potential financial irregularities. Option C. Share the raw data of the anomaly with other federal agencies that oversee energy infrastructure to solicit their immediate assessment and potential involvement. Option D. Advise facility management of the anomaly and request an immediate explanation, assuming a potential operational error or oversight. The correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed review of the anomaly, correlating it with known operational schedules, recent maintenance activities, and prevailing weather conditions specific to the Texas region, to identify potential legitimate explanations before considering further investigative steps. Explanation. The monitoring system demonstrates a potential anomaly in energy consumption data for a Department of Energy (DOE) facility in Texas. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires special agents to balance the need for thorough investigation with the imperative to avoid unnecessary disruption and protect sensitive operational information. The anomaly could indicate waste, fraud, abuse, or even a security vulnerability, necessitating a prompt yet judicious response. The best professional practice involves a systematic, evidence-based approach that prioritizes information gathering and preliminary assessment before escalating. This approach begins with a detailed review of the anomaly's characteristics, cross-referencing with known operational patterns, maintenance logs, and environmental factors specific to the Texas facility. The goal is to determine if the anomaly is explainable through legitimate operational variances or requires further inquiry. This aligns with the DOE OIG's mandate to ensure efficiency and integrity in DOE operations, as outlined in the Inspector General Act of 1978, which emphasizes conducting audits and investigations to prevent and detect waste, fraud, and abuse. By first seeking to understand the anomaly within its operational context, agents uphold principles of due process and avoid premature accusations or resource misallocation. An incorrect approach would be to immediately initiate a full-scale forensic audit or confront facility personnel without a preliminary understanding of the anomaly. This premature escalation could disrupt critical operations, damage trust with facility staff, and potentially alert individuals involved in illicit activities if they exist, thereby compromising the investigation. Also represents a failure to adhere to the principles of efficient resource management expected of an OIG. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the anomaly without sufficient investigation, perhaps due to perceived minor deviations or a desire to avoid additional workload. This failure to thoroughly investigate a potential indicator of waste, fraud, or abuse directly contravenes the OIG's core mission and could allow significant issues to persist undetected, leading to financial losses or compromised program integrity for the Department of Energy. Finally, an incorrect approach involves sharing the preliminary findings with unauthorized personnel or external parties. This breach of confidentiality not only jeopardizes the integrity of the investigation, but also violates privacy regulations and could lead to legal repercussions. Special agents must maintain strict confidentiality regarding ongoing investigations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with information validation and contextualization. This involves asking, what is the nature of the anomaly? What are the potential causes, both legitimate and illicit? What is the potential impact? What resources are required for a preliminary assessment? Based on this, a tiered investigative strategy should be developed, starting with low-impact, high-information yield activities and escalating only as necessary, always maintaining confidentiality and adhering to established protocols. Question 4. The performance metrics show a significant increase in reported waste disposal violations at Department of Energy (DOE) facilities across Texas. As a DOE OIG special agent, what is the most appropriate initial course of action to address this trend? Option A. Immediately recommend punitive actions against facility management based on the upward trend in reported violations. Option B. Focus solely on the number of violations reported, without delving into the specific circumstances or underlying causes of each incident. Option C. Classify the increase in violations as a potential statistical fluctuation and monitor the metrics without further immediate investigation. Option D. Initiate a comprehensive, evidence-based investigation to determine the nature, extent, and root causes of the reported violations, cross-referencing data, and conducting site visits as necessary. The correct answer is D. Initiate a comprehensive, evidence-based investigation to determine the nature, extent, and root causes of the reported violations, cross-referencing data, and conducting site visits as necessary. Explanation: the performance metrics show a significant increase in reported waste disposal violations at Department of Energy (DOE) facilities across Texas. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires special agents to balance the urgency of addressing potential environmental and safety hazards with the need for thorough, evidence-based investigations. Rushing to judgment or relying on incomplete information could lead to misallocation of resources, damage to facility reputations, or failure to identify the root causes of the violations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that enforcement actions are both effective and legally sound, adhering strictly to the DOE OIG's investigative protocols and relevant federal environmental statutes. The best approach involves a systematic, evidence-driven investigation that prioritizes factual accuracy and regulatory compliance. This means initiating a comprehensive review of the reported violations, cross-referencing them with facility records, conducting on-site inspections where necessary, and interviewing relevant personnel. The focus should be on gathering objective evidence to determine the nature and extent of noncompliance, identifying contributing factors, and assessing the potential risks posed. This methodical process ensures that any subsequent actions, such as recommending corrective measures or pursuing enforcement, are based on solid findings and align with the DOE OIG's mandate to promote integrity, accountability, and efficiency within the department. This aligns with the OIG's mission to conduct independent audits and investigations to prevent and detect waste, fraud, abuse, and misconduct, an approach that immediately recommends punitive measures based solely on the increased metric is professionally unacceptable. While the metric signals a potential problem, it does not, in itself, constitute proof of intentional wrongdoing or gross negligence. Such an approach bypasses the fundamental investigative principle of due process and could lead to unwarranted disciplinary actions or sanctions, violating principles of fairness and potentially exposing the OIG to legal challenges. Another unacceptable approach is to dismiss the increased metric as a statistical anomaly without any further inquiry. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to heed potential warning signs of systemic issues or emerging threats to environmental safety. The OIG has a responsibility to investigate credible indicators of noncompliance, and ignoring a significant trend would be a dereliction of duty, potentially allowing serious violations to persist unchecked. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on the quantity of violations without analyzing their severity or root cause is also flawed. While the number of reported incidents is important, understanding the underlying reasons for these violations is crucial for developing effective long-term solutions and preventing recurrence. This superficial analysis fails to address the systemic issues that may be contributing to the problem, rendering any proposed remedies ineffective. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with recognizing the significance of performance metrics as indicators, not conclusions. The next step is to initiate a preliminary assessment to determine the credibility and scope of the reported trend. If the assessment warrants further action, a formal investigation should be launched, guided by established investigative protocols and legal standards. Throughout the process, maintaining objectivity, meticulously documenting all findings, and ensuring adherence to all applicable regulations are paramount. The ultimate goal is to achieve a just and effective resolution that upholds the integrity of the DOE and protects public interest. Question 5. The performance metrics show a concerning upward trend in reported energy theft incidents across Texas. Considering the Department of Energy OIG's mandate for process optimization, which of the following investigative strategies would best address this trend while ensuring efficient use of resources and promoting long-term deterrence? Option A. Recommend immediate legislative changes to increase penalties for energy theft without first analyzing the effectiveness of current enforcement and reporting mechanisms. Option B. Focus investigative efforts on identifying and prosecuting individual perpetrators, assuming the increase is solely due to increased criminal activity. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of existing energy theft reporting and investigation protocols used by regulated entities in Texas, analyzing data for patterns and engaging with stakeholders to identify systemic inefficiencies and recommend targeted process improvements. Option D, immediately increase the number of field investigations and enforcement actions against all reported instances of energy theft to send a strong deterrent message. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive review of existing energy theft reporting and investigation protocols used by regulated entities in Texas, analyzing data for patterns and engaging with stakeholders to identify systemic inefficiencies and recommend targeted process improvements. Explanation: the performance metrics show a significant increase in reported energy theft incidents within the jurisdiction of Texas, impacting the operational efficiency and revenue streams of regulated energy providers. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires special agents to balance the immediate need for enforcement with the long-term goal of process optimization to prevent future occurrences. A careful judgment is required to identify root causes rather than just addressing symptoms, ensuring that investigative resources are used effectively and that systemic issues are rectified. The best approach involves a comprehensive review of the reporting and investigation process for energy theft in Texas. This includes analyzing the data to identify patterns, common modus operandi, and geographical hotspots. It also necessitates engaging with energy providers to understand their internal controls, reporting mechanisms, and any challenges they face in detecting and reporting theft. The goal is to identify bottlenecks, inefficiency, or gaps in current procedures that contribute to the rise in incidents or hinder effective resolution. By understanding these systemic issues, special agents can recommend targeted process improvements, training for providers, and potentially legislative or regulatory changes to enhance prevention and detection. This aligns with the Department of Energy OIG's mandate to promote efficiency and effectiveness within the energy sector, as well as Texas state laws concerning energy regulation and consumer protection, which implicitly require proactive measures to safeguard the integrity of the energy supply and prevent fraud. An approach that focuses solely on increasing the number of investigations without analyzing the underlying causes is professionally unacceptable. While enforcement is a critical function, a reactive strategy that doesn't address why incidents are increasing will lead to a perpetual cycle of investigation without resolution. This fails to optimize resource allocation and does not contribute to long-term deterrence or prevention, potentially violating principles of efficient government operations and the spirit of regulatory oversight. Another unacceptable approach is to attribute the increase solely to external factors or the behavior of individuals without examining the internal processes of reporting entities or the effectiveness of existing regulatory frameworks in Texas. This overlooks the potential for systemic weaknesses in detection, reporting, or security measures that could be exploited. It also fails to leverage the OIG's role in identifying and recommending improvements to regulatory compliance and operational integrity. Finally, an approach that prioritizes immediate punitive actions over a thorough diagnostic review of the process is also professionally deficient. While accountability is important, a rushed punitive response without understanding the contributing factors can lead to misdirected efforts and may not address the root causes of the problem, thus failing to achieve sustainable improvements in energy theft prevention within Texas. Professionals should employ a data-driven, analytical decision-making framework. This involves first defining the problem clearly, then gathering and analyzing relevant data to understand its scope and potential causes. Next, they should identify and evaluate potential solutions, considering their feasibility, effectiveness, and alignment with regulatory requirements and ethical obligations. Finally, they should implement the chosen solution and monitor its impact, making adjustments as necessary. This iterative process ensures that actions are strategic, efficient, and contribute to the overall mission of the OIG. Question 6. The performance metrics show a consistent backlog in the processing of whistleblower complaints within the Department of Energy Office of Inspector General, OIG, in California. Considering the principles of process optimization, which of the following strategies would be the most effective and professionally sound for addressing this issue? Option A. Immediately hire additional investigative staff to increase the overall capacity for complaint processing. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the entire complaint intake and processing workflow to identify specific bottlenecks and inefficiencies, utilizing data to inform targeted improvements. Option C. Rely on individual agent feedback and informal discussions to implement ad hoc changes to the complaint handling procedures. Option D. Implement a policy to only expedite the processing of whistleblower complaints deemed high impact by senior management, deferring others. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the entire complaint intake and processing workflow to identify specific bottlenecks and inefficiencies, utilizing data to inform targeted improvements. Explanation: the performance metrics show a consistent backlog in the processing of whistleblower complaints within the Department of Energy Office of Inspector General, OIG, in California. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts the OIG's mandate to investigate waste, fraud, and abuse, potentially allowing serious misconduct to persist unaddressed. The integrity and efficiency of the investigative process are paramount, and delays can erode public trust and hinder effective oversight. Careful judgment is required to balance thoroughness with timely action, ensuring that resources are allocated effectively without compromising the quality of investigations. The best approach involves a systematic review of the entire complaint processing workflow, from initial intake to final disposition, to identify bottlenecks and inefficiencies. This includes analyzing the time taken at each stage, the resources allocated to each task, and the communication protocols between different units. By mapping the current process and gathering data on performance, specific areas for improvement can be targeted. This aligns with the principles of process optimization, which aims to streamline operations, reduce waste, and enhance overall effectiveness. Specifically, this approach is justified by the DOE OIG's commitment to efficient and effective oversight as outlined in its internal policies, and the Inspector General Act of 1978, which mandates prompt investigation of alleged wrongdoing. Focusing on data-driven analysis of the existing workflow allows for targeted interventions that are most likely to yield significant improvements in processing times and resource utilization. An approach that focuses solely on increasing staffing levels without understanding the root causes of the backlog is professionally unacceptable. While more personnel might seem like a solution, it could exacerbate existing inefficiencies if the underlying process is flawed, leading to increased costs without proportional gains in output. This fails to address potential bottlenecks in technology, training, or interdepartmental communication, which are often critical factors in processing delays. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to prioritize only the most complex cases for immediate attention, while allowing simpler complaints to languish. While complex cases require significant resources, neglecting less complex but still valid complaints can lead to a buildup of a different kind of backlog, potentially allowing for the continuation of minor but pervasive issues that, in aggregate, represent significant waste or fraud. This selective prioritization, without a clear, objective, and documented rationale tied to risk assessment, can be seen as arbitrary and may not serve the OIG's broad mandate. Finally, an approach that relies on anecdotal evidence and individual agent suggestions without a structured data collection and analysis framework is insufficient. While individual insights are valuable, they may not represent systemic issues. Without a systematic, data-driven approach, interventions are likely to be piecemeal and may not address the core problems, leading to a continued cycle of backlogs and inefficiencies. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with clearly defining the problem and its impact. This should be followed by data collection and analysis to understand the current state and identify root causes. Based on this analysis, potential solutions should be developed, evaluated for their feasibility and potential impact, and then implemented. Continuous monitoring and evaluation are crucial to ensure that the implemented solutions are effective and to make adjustments as needed. This iterative, data-driven approach ensures that resources are used effectively and that the OIG can fulfill its mission efficiently. Question 7. Benchmark analysis indicates that the Department of Energy OIG in Illinois is experiencing delays in case closure due to perceived inefficiencies in evidence processing and reporting. Considering the regulatory framework governing federal investigations, which of the following approaches would best optimize the investigative process while upholding legal and ethical standards? Option A. Immediately implement a new, faster evidence logging system based on recommendations from a technology vendor, without extensive testing or validation of its impact on evidence chain of custody requirements. Option B. Streamline the evidence review process by reducing the number of supervisory sign-offs required for each piece of evidence, assuming that agent expertise alone is sufficient to ensure accuracy and compliance. Option C. Prioritize the reduction of reporting timelines by allowing agents to submit preliminary findings without full corroboration, with the understanding that full documentation can be completed post-closure. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of current evidence processing and reporting workflows, utilizing data analytics to identify specific bottlenecks, and then develop and pilot proposed improvements, with a focus on maintaining evidence integrity and procedural fairness before agency-wide adoption. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive review of current evidence processing and reporting workflows, utilizing data analytics to identify specific bottlenecks, and then develop and pilot proposed improvements with a focus on maintaining evidence integrity and procedural fairness before agency-wide adoption. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for Department of Energy, DOE, Office of Inspector General OIG special agents, balancing the need for efficient investigative processes with the imperative to uphold the integrity of evidence and due process. The professional challenge lies in identifying and implementing process improvements that enhance effectiveness without compromising legal standards or the rights of individuals involved in investigation. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any optimization efforts are grounded in sound investigative principles and relevant regulations. The best approach involves a systematic review of existing investigative workflows, identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies through data analysis and stakeholder feedback, and then proposing targeted improvements that are validated through pilot programs before full implementation. This method is correct because it aligns with the principles of due process and evidence integrity mandated by federal law and DOE OIG policies. Specifically, it ensures that any changes are tested for their impact on the legality and admissibility of evidence, and that investigative procedures remain robust and fair. This systematic, data-driven, and validated approach minimizes the risk of introducing procedural errors that could jeopardize an investigation or lead to legal challenges. It also fosters buy-in from investigative staff by involving them in the process and demonstrating the tangible benefits of the changes. An incorrect approach would be to implement changes based solely on anecdotal evidence or a desire for speed, without rigorous testing or consideration of legal implications. This could lead to the adoption of flawed procedures that compromise evidence integrity, violate established investigative protocols, or infringe upon the rights of subjects, potentially rendering evidence inadmissible and undermining the OIG's mission. Another incorrect approach would be to focus optimization efforts on areas that, while appearing efficient, could inadvertently create opportunities for bias or compromise the independence of the investigative process. For instance, streamlining evidence handling in a way that reduces oversight could increase the risk of tampering or contamination, even if it appears faster. A further incorrect approach would be to adopt new technologies or methodologies without adequate training or understanding of their implications for evidence collection and preservation. This could result in the improper handling of digital or physical evidence, leading to its exclusion from proceedings and weakening the investigative outcome. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal and ethical standards, followed by a thorough assessment of the potential impact of any proposed changes on investigative integrity and effectiveness. This involves consulting relevant statutes, regulations, and internal policies, seeking input from legal counsel and experienced investigators, and conducting pilot testing to validate the efficacy and legality of any process modifications. The ultimate goal is to achieve operational excellence without compromising the foundational principles of justice and accountability. Question 8. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential fraud scheme involving a government contractor operating in California. As a Department of Energy OIG special agent, you suspect the contractor may be misrepresenting costs on a significant contract. You need to obtain detailed financial records to verify these suspicions, but you must do so within the bounds of federal law and investigative best practices. Which of the following approaches best aligns with these requirements? Option A. Conduct an unannounced site visit to the contractor's premises to observe operations and informally question employees about their financial reporting. Option B. Contact the contractor's bank directly to request copies of their financial statements based on your suspicions. Option C. Attempt to gain access to the contractor's financial systems by posing as a representative of another federal agency interested in their business practices. Option D. Prepare and serve a legally authorized subpoena on the contractor to compel the production of specific financial records relevant to the contract. Correct answer is D. Prepare and serve a legally authorized subpoena on the contractor to compel the production of specific financial records relevant to the contract. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Department of Energy, DOE, Office of Inspector General OIG, special agent in California due to the inherent tension between the need for timely information gathering and the strict legal and ethical boundaries governing investigations. The agent must balance the urgency of a potential fraud scheme with the requirement to obtain information lawfully and ethically, avoiding any actions that could compromise the integrity of the investigation or violate the rights of individuals. The specific context of a federal investigation within a state jurisdiction adds complexity, requiring adherence to both federal investigative standards and potentially relevant state privacy or access laws, though federal law generally preempts in such matters. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves initiating a formal, legally sanctioned information gathering process. This means developing a comprehensive investigative plan that outlines the scope, objectives, and methods of the inquiry. Crucially, it includes preparing and submitting appropriate legal process, such as a subpoena or search warrant, to obtain the necessary financial records from the contractor. This approach is correct because it adheres strictly to the legal framework governing federal investigations, as established by federal statutes and DOE OIG policies. It ensures that all evidence is obtained lawfully, preserving its admissibility in any subsequent proceedings and upholding due process rights. This method respects the contractor's rights while enabling the OIG to conduct a thorough and credible investigation. Incorrect approach is analysis. Initiating an informal, unannounced site visit to observe operations and casually inquire about financial practices without prior legal authorization is professionally unacceptable. This approach bypasses established legal procedures for accessing sensitive information, potentially violating the contractor's privacy and property rights. It could be construed as an unlawful search or seizure, jeopardizing the entire investigation and exposing the agent and the OIG to legal repercussions. Furthermore, it lacks the necessary documentation and oversight inherent in a formal investigative process, undermining the credibility of any findings. Directly contacting the contractor's bank to request financial statements based solely on a suspicion, without any legal process, is also professionally unacceptable. Banks are bound by federal and state privacy laws, e.g., the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, and cannot disclose customer financial information without proper legal authorization, such as a subpoena or court order. Such an action would constitute a violation of privacy laws and could lead to severe penalties for the agent and the DOE OIG, as well as rendering any obtained information inadmissible. Attempting to gain access to the contractor's internal financial systems by posing as a representative of a different government agency or a potential business partner is a clear violation of ethical conduct and federal investigative standards. This constitutes deception and misrepresentation, which can undermine the integrity of the OIG's mission and lead to criminal charges for fraud or impersonation. It erodes public trust and compromises the agent's authority and credibility. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a structured, legalistic approach. First, clearly define the investigative objective and the specific information needed. Second, consult with legal counsel within the DOE OIG to determine the most appropriate legal tool, e.g., subpoena, search warrant, based on the evidence and the relevant statutes. Third, meticulously prepare the legal documentation, ensuring it meets all statutory requirements for specificity and authorization. Fourth, execute the legal process through authorized channels, respecting all procedural safeguards. Finally, document every step of the process meticulously. This systematic, legally grounded approach ensures the integrity of the investigation and protects the rights of all parties involved. Question 9. The performance metrics show a concerning rise in energy theft incidents across rural Texas. As a Department of Energy OIG special agent, What is the most effective and legally sound approach to address this escalating issue while optimizing investigative resources? Option A. Immediately dispatch teams to conduct unannounced, widespread site inspections in all identified high-incident rural areas to deter further theft. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive analysis of the reported incidents to identify patterns, geographic concentrations, and common methods, then develop targeted investigative plans based on this intelligence, potentially involving surveillance and data analysis. Option C. Focus on making as many arrests as possible in the shortest time frame to demonstrate a strong response, even if the evidence is not fully corroborated. Option D. Prioritize interviewing community members and utility customers to gather complaints and allegations, and initiate enforcement actions based on the volume of these reports. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive analysis of the reported incidents to identify patterns, geographic concentrations, and common methods, then develop targeted investigative plans based on this intelligence, potentially involving surveillance and data analysis. Explanation: the performance metrics show a significant increase in reported energy theft incidents in rural areas of Texas, impacting the reliability of the power grid and potentially leading to safety hazards. This scenario is professionally challenging because special agents must balance the need for swift action to address immediate threats with the requirement for thorough, evidence-based investigations. Rushing investigations could lead to erroneous conclusions, damage public trust, and compromise future enforcement efforts. Conversely, excessive delay could allow the problem to escalate, causing further harm. Careful judgment is required to prioritize resources, employ appropriate investigative techniques, and ensure all actions are legally sound and ethically defensible under Texas law and Department of Energy Office of Inspector General (OIG) guidelines. The best approach involves a systematic, intelligence-driven strategy. This means first analyzing the available data to identify patterns, hotspots, and potential modus operandi associated with the reported energy theft. Based on this analysis, agents should develop targeted investigative plans, which may include a combination of overt and covert surveillance, data analysis of utility records, obtained through proper legal channels, and interviews with informants or affected parties. This methodical process ensures that investigative resources are deployed efficiently and effectively, focusing on the most promising leads, while adhering to due process and privacy considerations. This aligns with the OIG's mandate to conduct thorough and impartial investigations, ensuring that actions taken are supported by credible evidence and comply with all applicable federal and state laws, including those governing evidence collection and informant management in Texas. An approach that immediately initiates widespread, uncoordinated site inspections without prior intelligence analysis is professionally unacceptable. This would be a wasteful allocation of resources, potentially alerting perpetrators and diminishing the element of surprise. It also risks overstepping investigative boundaries if not properly authorized. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to rely solely on anecdotal evidence and public complaints without conducting independent verification or gathering corroborating evidence. While public input is valuable, it must be treated as a starting point for investigation, not as conclusive proof. This approach fails to meet the OIG standards for evidence-based investigations and could lead to unfounded accusations. Finally, an approach that prioritizes making arrests over gathering comprehensive evidence is ethically and legally flawed. The goal of an investigation is to uncover the truth and build a strong case for prosecution if warranted, not simply to achieve a high arrest number. This can lead to wrongful arrests and undermine the integrity of the investigative process. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the scope and nature of the problem through data analysis and intelligence gathering. This should be followed by developing a strategic investigative plan that outlines specific objectives, methodologies, and resource allocation. Throughout the investigation, continuous assessment of findings and adaptation of strategies are crucial. Adherence to legal and ethical guidelines, including proper documentation and chain of custody for evidence, must be maintained at all times. Collaboration with other agencies, where appropriate, can also enhance effectiveness. Question 10. The evaluation methodology shows that a recent series of audits conducted by the Department of Energy Office of Inspector General in California identified potential cost savings of $15 million across 3 distinct programs. Program A's savings are documented with high certainty and are projected to continue for 10 years. Program B's savings are estimated with moderate certainty and are projected for 5 years. Program C's savings are based on preliminary findings and are projected for 3 years, with a potential for significant offsets. If the DOE OIG uses a discount rate of 5% for future savings, and the preliminary offsets for Program C are estimated at 20% of its projected savings, what is the most accurate net present value of the identified cost savings, assuming the initial year's savings are already realized and do not require discounting? Option A. Sum all potential savings and then deduct a flat 10% for uncertainty across all programs, without considering individual projection periods or offsets. Option B. Exclude savings from Program C entirely due to the preliminary nature of its findings and potential offsets, and only calculate the present value of Programs A and B. Option C. Average the total potential savings across the 3 programs and apply a single discount factor based on the longest projection period. Option D. Calculate the net present value for each program individually, applying the discount rate to future savings and subtracting the estimated offsets for Program C, then sum the results. The correct answer is D. Calculate the net present value for each program individually, applying the discount rate to future savings and subtracting the estimated offsets for Program C, then sum the results. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows a critical need for process optimization within the Department of Energy Office of Inspector General, DOE OIG, in California. This scenario is professionally challenging because special agents must balance the imperative to efficiently investigate potential fraud, waste, and abuse with the strict adherence to federal regulations and the accurate reporting of findings. Miscalculations or misinterpretations of data can lead to incorrect conclusions, potentially impacting resource allocation, prosecution decisions, and the overall effectiveness of the OIG's oversight mission. Careful judgment is required to ensure that analytical rigor is maintained, while also meeting investigative timelines. The best approach involves a systematic recalculation of the identified cost savings using the established DOE OIG methodology for quantifying financial recoveries. This methodology, as outlined in DOE OIG internal guidance and consistent with federal audit standards, requires agents to meticulously trace all documented cost savings back to their source, apply appropriate discount rates for future savings, and account for any potential offsets or unrecoverable costs. This ensures that the reported figures are accurate, defensible, and comply with federal financial reporting requirements. By adhering to this precise calculation method, agents uphold the integrity of their findings and provide reliable data for decision-making. An incorrect approach would be to simply average the reported savings across all investigated programs, without considering the unique characteristics or methodologies applied to each. This fails to acknowledge that different programs may have varying levels of certainty in their savings projections, different accounting methods, or different risk factors that affect the actual recoverability of funds. Such a generalized calculation would not meet the rigorous standards for financial reporting and could lead to an overestimation or underestimation of actual savings, thereby misrepresenting the OIG's impact. Another incorrect approach would be to exclude any savings that are not directly tied to a formal prosecution or conviction. While successful prosecutions are a significant outcome, the OIG's mandate extends to identifying and quantifying savings achieved through corrective actions, policy changes, or voluntary disclosures, even in the absence of legal proceedings. Excluding these would understate the OIG's effectiveness in preventing future losses and recovering funds through non-adversarial means, failing to capture the full scope of their investigative impact. A further incorrect approach would be to use a simplified estimation based on a percentage of the total program budget without substantiating the specific cost-saving measures. This method lacks the necessary detail and audit trail required by federal regulations for financial reporting. It is speculative and does not demonstrate the concrete actions taken to achieve savings, making it impossible to verify or defend the reported figures. A professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a commitment to data integrity and regulatory compliance. Agents should first understand the specific reporting requirements and calculation methodologies mandated by the DOE OIG. When faced with complex data, they should break down the problem into smaller, manageable parts, meticulously verifying each component of the calculation. If there is any ambiguity, seeking clarification from supervisors or subject matter experts is crucial. The ultimate goal is to produce findings that are not only accurate, but also ethically sound and fully compliant with all applicable federal laws and DOE OIG policies. Question 11. The control framework reveals that a Department of Energy OIG special agent conducting an investigation in California has discovered sensitive personal information related to a potential subject of the investigation on a publicly accessible but unsecured government server. The agent believes this information, if obtained through proper channels, would be highly relevant to the case. What is the most appropriate course of action for the agent to take? Option A. Attempt to independently research and determine the legality of accessing and using the information before consulting with any superiors or legal counsel. Option B. Incorporate the discovered information directly into the investigative file and proceed with the investigation, assuming the information's relevance makes its acquisition permissible. Option C. Disregard the discovered information entirely, as its method of acquisition may be questionable, and continue the investigation without it. Option D. Immediately document the discovery, assess the information's relevance to the investigation, and consult with OIG legal counsel and the special agent in charge before taking any further action or incorporating the information into the investigative file. Correct answer is D. Immediately document the discovery, assess the information's relevance to the investigation, and consult with OIG legal counsel and the special agent in charge before taking any further action or incorporating the information into the investigative file. Explanation. The control framework reveals a critical juncture in the Department of Energy Office of Inspector General OIG, Special Agent's investigative process in California. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the imperative of thorough investigation with the strictures of privacy laws and departmental policy, particularly when dealing with sensitive information obtained through potentially unauthorized means. The agent must exercise sound judgment to avoid compromising the investigation or violating legal and ethical boundaries. The best professional approach involves meticulously documenting the discovery of the information, assessing its relevance to the ongoing investigation, and immediately consulting with the OIG legal counsel and the special agent in charge, SAC, before taking any further action or incorporating the information into the investigative file. This approach is correct because it adheres to established protocols for handling potentially inadmissible or improperly obtained evidence. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of due process and the federal rules of evidence, which govern the admissibility of evidence in federal investigations. By seeking legal guidance, the agent ensures that any subsequent use of the information complies with the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures and relevant California privacy statutes. This proactive consultation safeguards the integrity of the investigation and prevents potential legal challenges that could render crucial evidence inadmissible. An incorrect approach would be to immediately incorporate the information into the investigative file and proceed with the investigation as if it were obtained through legitimate means. This fails to acknowledge the potential legal infirmities of the discovery and risks violating privacy rights protected under California law and federal constitutional principles. Such an action could lead to the suppression of evidence and disciplinary action. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the information entirely, even if it appears highly relevant to the investigation. While caution is warranted, discarding potentially vital evidence without proper assessment and consultation can hinder the OIG's mission to detect and prevent waste, fraud, and abuse within the Department of Energy. This passive approach fails to fulfill the agent's duty to conduct a comprehensive investigation. A further incorrect approach is to attempt to independently verify the information's legality or admissibility without consulting legal counsel. This bypasses the expertise of legal professionals and could lead to misinterpretations of complex legal standards, potentially resulting in the improper handling of evidence and jeopardizing the investigation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Recognizing potential legal or policy violations in the discovery of information. 2. Pausing to assess the nature and implications of the discovery. 3. Consulting with appropriate legal counsel and supervisors. 4. Following established protocols for evidence handling. And 5. documenting all actions and decisions meticulously. This systematic approach ensures that investigations are conducted with integrity and within the bounds of the law. Question 12. Quality control measures reveal that a DOE OIG special agent is investigating a potential fraud scheme involving federal grant funds awarded to a private company in California. The agent has gathered some initial evidence suggesting irregularities, but has not yet completed a full analysis or confirmed the extent of the alleged fraud. The agent is concerned about the potential for further financial losses and is considering how to proceed with information sharing. Which of the following actions best reflects professional conduct and adherence to DOE OIG investigative guidelines? Option A. Provide the initial evidence and suspicions to a local news outlet to alert the public and encourage transparency regarding the use of federal funds. Option B. Continue the investigation, meticulously documenting all findings, and consult with DOE OIG legal counsel and supervisors to determine the appropriate time and method for any necessary disclosures or actions, coordinating through official channels. Option C. Share the preliminary investigative leads and suspicions with industry associations and other federal agencies not directly involved in the investigation to solicit their input and awareness. Option D. Immediately contact the suspected company to inform them of the preliminary findings and express concern about the potential for further financial losses, suggesting they review their internal controls. The correct answer is B. Continue the investigation, meticulously documenting all findings, and consult with DOE OIG legal counsel and supervisors to determine the appropriate time and method for any necessary disclosures or actions, coordinating through official channels. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for thorough investigation and the potential for premature disclosure of sensitive information that could compromise ongoing efforts or unfairly damage reputations. Special agents must exercise careful judgment to balance these competing interests, adhering strictly to the Department of Energy Office of Inspector General, OIG policies and federal regulations governing investigations and information handling. The specific context of a potential fraud scheme involving federal funds adds a layer of urgency and legal complexity. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a systematic and controlled approach to information dissemination. This means gathering sufficient evidence to establish a prima facie case, consulting with appropriate legal counsel within the DOE OIG, and coordinating any public statements or disclosures through official channels. This approach ensures that information released is accurate, legally sound, and does not jeopardize the integrity of the investigation or the rights of individuals involved. It aligns with the principles of due process and the DOE OIG's mandate to conduct investigations with integrity and discretion, as outlined in DOE OIG manual provisions regarding investigative procedures and public affairs coordination. Incorrect approaches analysis. Disclosing preliminary findings to the media without corroboration or official authorization is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This premature disclosure can violate DOE OIG policies on information control, potentially compromise the investigation by alerting subjects, and lead to reputational damage for individuals or entities based on unsubstantiated allegations. It also bypasses established protocols for public affairs communication, which are designed to ensure accuracy and prevent misinformation. Sharing detailed investigative leads and unverified suspicions with external stakeholders, such as other federal agencies not directly involved in the investigation or industry associations, without proper clearance, is also professionally unacceptable. This action risks breaching confidentiality requirements, potentially violating privacy laws, and could inadvertently tip off subjects or create undue alarm. It demonstrates a lack of adherence to established information-sharing protocols and a failure to respect the chain of command and investigative integrity. Initiating contact with the suspected company to warn them about the ongoing investigation before sufficient evidence is gathered and a formal strategy is in place is a critical procedural and ethical lapse. This action could be construed as obstruction or interference with an investigation, depending on the specifics and intent. It bypasses the established investigative process, potentially allowing subjects to destroy evidence or alter their behavior in ways that hinder the investigation. It also fails to uphold the principle of impartiality and the OIG's duty to conduct objective inquiries. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should follow a structured decision-making process. First, they must meticulously document all gathered evidence and assess its strength. Second, they should consult with their supervisors and the OIG's legal counsel to determine the appropriate next steps, including whether further investigation is warranted or if a referral to another agency is necessary. Third, any communication regarding the investigation, especially to external parties or the public, must be channeled through the designated OIG Public Affairs Office and follow established protocols. This ensures that actions are legally compliant, ethically sound, and strategically aligned with the overall investigative objectives. Question 13. The audit findings indicate that a Department of Energy Office of Inspector General Special Agent in California, while investigating allegations of procurement fraud against a contractor, discovered a close personal relationship with a key executive at the contracting firm. This executive is not the direct subject of the investigation, but possesses information crucial to its outcome. The agent has not yet disclosed this relationship to their supervisor. What is the most appropriate and ethically sound course of action for the special agent to take under these circumstances, adhering to federal ethics regulations? Option A. Discreetly gather information from the executive outside of formal investigative channels, believing this personal connection can expedite the acquisition of necessary facts. Option B. Resign from the investigation without formally reporting the personal relationship, believing this action sufficiently removes them from any potential conflict. Option C. Continue the investigation, exercising extra diligence to remain impartial, and only disclose the relationship if it directly impacts the evidence or is discovered by others. Option D. Immediately report the personal relationship to their supervisor and the OIG's Office of Professional Responsibility to determine appropriate steps for managing or mitigating the conflict of interest. The correct answer is D. Immediately report the personal relationship to their supervisor and the OIG's Office of Professional Responsibility to determine appropriate steps for managing or mitigating the conflict of interest. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential conflict of interest involving a Department of Energy, OIG special agent in California. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the agent to navigate complex ethical boundaries and adhere strictly to federal regulations governing employee conduct and the investigative process. The agent's personal relationship could compromise the impartiality and integrity of the investigation, potentially undermining public trust in the OIG's work. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions are transparent, ethical, and in full compliance with the law. The best approach involves immediate and full disclosure of the potential conflict of interest to the agent's supervisor and the OIG's Office of Professional Responsibility. This approach is correct because it aligns with the fundamental principles of ethical conduct for federal employees, particularly those in law enforcement and oversight roles. Specifically, 5 C.F.R. Section 2635, 402a requires employees to avoid situations where their personal interests could impair their impartiality or create an appearance of impropriety. By disclosing the relationship, the agent initiates a formal process to manage or eliminate the conflict, ensuring that the investigation proceeds without bias. This proactive step upholds the integrity of the OIG and demonstrates a commitment to ethical standards. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the investigation while attempting to manage the conflict internally without informing superiors. This fails to address the appearance of impropriety, which is as critical as an actual conflict. Federal ethics regulations, such as those found in 5 C.F.R. Part 2635, emphasize the importance of avoiding even the appearance of a conflict of interest. Failing to disclose creates a significant ethical breach and could lead to the invalidation of investigative findings. Another incorrect approach is to resign from the case without formally reporting the conflict. While this removes the agent from direct involvement, it does not fulfill the obligation to report potential ethical violations or conflicts of interest to the appropriate authorities. The OIG has established procedures for handling such matters, and bypassing them hinders the organization's ability to ensure accountability and maintain ethical standards across all investigations. A further incorrect approach would be to continue the investigation and only disclose the relationship if it becomes a point of contention during the case. This is ethically unsound and legally problematic. The duty to disclose is immediate upon recognizing a potential conflict. Delaying disclosure suggests an intent to conceal the situation, which is a serious ethical lapse and could have severe repercussions for the agent and the investigation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency and adherence to established ethical guidelines. When faced with a potential conflict of interest, the first step should always be to identify the nature of the conflict and its potential impact on impartiality. Subsequently, consult relevant regulations and agency policies. The immediate and mandatory action is to report the situation to the designated supervisor or ethics office. This ensures that the conflict is managed appropriately, either through recusal, reassignment, or other mitigating measures, thereby preserving the integrity of the investigation and the agency. Question 14. Analysis of a Department of Energy OIG special agent stationed in California who is investigating a contractor for potential procurement fraud related to a renewable energy project. The agent discovers that the project manager for the contractor is a close personal friend with whom they have a long-standing relationship outside of work. What is the most appropriate course of action for the special agent? Option A. Immediately report the personal relationship to the special agent in charge and request to be recused from all aspects of the investigation involving this contractor. Option B. Continue with the investigation but exercise extreme diligence to ensure no bias is present in the findings. Option C. Proceed with the investigation without disclosing the personal relationship, believing it will not impact professional judgment. Option D. Delegate specific investigative tasks to a subordinate while continuing to supervise the overall investigation. The correct answer is A. Immediately report the personal relationship to the special agent in charge and request to be recused from all aspects of the investigation involving this contractor. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Department of Energy, DOE, Office of Inspector General, OIG, special agent in California due to the potential for conflicts of interest and the need to maintain impartiality. The agent's personal relationship with the contractor's project manager could compromise the integrity of the investigation, leading to perceptions of bias or actual undue influence. Strict adherence to ethical guidelines and investigative protocols is paramount to ensure public trust and the credibility of the OIG's findings. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately disclosing the personal relationship to the special agent in charge, SAC, and recusing oneself from any investigative activities related to the contractor. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the conflict of interest by removing the agent from a position where their impartiality could be questioned or compromised. DOE Manual, Section 3. 2. 1. Conflicts of interest. Mandates that employees report any potential or actual conflicts of interest to their supervisor. Recusal is the standard ethical and regulatory remedy to ensure objectivity and maintain the integrity of the investigative process. This proactive disclosure and withdrawal uphold the principles of fairness and impartiality required of federal investigators. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the investigation, but attempt to be extra diligent to avoid any appearance of bias. This is professionally unacceptable because it fails to acknowledge the inherent risk of perceived or actual bias stemming from the personal relationship. While diligence is always required, it cannot unilaterally negate a conflict of interest. The DOE Manual, Section 3. 2. 1. Emphasizes avoidance and elimination of conflicts, not mitigation through increased effort after the conflict is identified. Another incorrect approach is to continue the investigation without disclosing the relationship, believing that the personal relationship is not significant enough to influence the investigation. This is ethically and regulatorily flawed because it violates the duty to disclose potential conflicts and undermines the principle of objective inquiry. The DOE Manual, Section 3. 2. 1. Requires reporting even potential conflicts, and the subjective assessment of significance by the employee is insufficient to override the reporting requirement. A final incorrect approach is to delegate specific tasks of the investigation to a subordinate while continuing to oversee the overall investigation. This is also professionally unacceptable, as it does not fully remove the agent from the investigative process and still leaves room for potential indirect influence or the appearance of impropriety. The conflict of interest remains, and the agent's supervisory role could still be perceived as tainted, violating the spirit and letter of conflict of interest regulations. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing potential conflicts of interest should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, adherence to policy, and the preservation of integrity. This involves 1. Identifying any personal, financial, or professional relationships that could reasonably be perceived as influencing one's judgment or actions. 2. Consulting relevant ethical codes and agency regulations, in this case, DOE OIG manual sections on conflicts of interest. 3. Proactively disclosing any identified potential or actual conflicts to the appropriate supervisor or designated ethics official. 4. Following the prescribed procedures for recusal or other conflict mitigation strategies as directed by the agency. The overarching principle is to err on the side of caution and to ensure that all investigative activities are conducted with unimpeachable objectivity and fairness. Question 15. The review process indicates that a DOE OIG special agent in California is investigating allegations of misuse of federal grant funds by a university research department. The agent has received an anonymous tip alleging that a specific professor is diverting grant money for personal use and has been instructed by a DOE program manager to look into it immediately by accessing the professor's university email and grant financial records. What is the most appropriate course of action for the special agent? Option A. Seek appropriate legal authorization, such as a search warrant or subpoena, based on probable cause, to access the professor's email and financial records, while coordinating with the university's compliance office to minimize disruption to research. Option B. Inform the DOE program manager that direct access without legal authorization is not permissible and await further instructions or guidance on how to proceed lawfully. Option C. Contact the professor directly to inquire about the allegations and request voluntary access to their email and financial records. Option D. Immediately access the professor's university email and grant financial records, citing the DOE program manager's instruction and the need for immediate investigation. The correct answer is A. Seek appropriate legal authorization, such as a search warrant or subpoena based on probable cause, to access the professor's email and financial records, while coordinating with the university's compliance office to minimize disruption to research. Explanation. The review process indicates a scenario where a special agent of the Department of Energy Office of Inspector General, DOE OIG in California, is investigating potential misuse of federal grant funds by a research institution. The challenge lies in balancing the need for thorough investigation with the protection of individual privacy and the integrity of ongoing research, all while adhering to the specific legal and ethical obligations of a federal investigator. Missteps could lead to compromised evidence, damage to the institution's reputation, or legal challenges. The best approach involves a meticulous and legally sound method of evidence gathering that respects privacy rights and institutional protocols. This entails obtaining necessary legal authorizations, such as search warrants or subpoenas, based on probable cause, before accessing sensitive research data or personal communications. The agent must also coordinate with the institution's administration to ensure the investigation minimizes disruption to legitimate research activities and adheres to any established data handling policies. This method is correct because it aligns with federal investigative standards, the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, and the DOE OIG's own investigative guidelines, which mandate lawful and ethical conduct. It ensures that evidence is obtained legally and is admissible in any subsequent proceedings, while also demonstrating respect for the rights of individuals and the operational needs of the grantee. An incorrect approach would be to directly access electronic research data or employee communications without proper legal authorization, relying on the agent's authority to inspect grant-related materials. This is professionally unacceptable because it violates the Fourth Amendment and established investigative procedures. Such actions could lead to the suppression of evidence, internal disciplinary action, and civil liability. Another incorrect approach would be to prematurely disclose allegations of misuse to the public or media before a thorough investigation and formal findings are made. This is ethically unsound and professionally damaging, as it can unfairly prejudice the institution and its personnel, potentially jeopardizing the investigation and violating DOE-OIG policies on confidentiality and due process. A third incorrect approach would be to accept unsubstantiated allegations from a disgruntled former employee as definitive proof of wrongdoing without independent corroboration or further investigation. This demonstrates a failure to exercise due diligence and critical judgment, potentially leading to a flawed investigation and unjust accusations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance, ethical conduct, and procedural fairness. This involves understanding the scope of their authority, meticulously documenting all investigative steps, seeking legal counsel when necessary, and maintaining objectivity throughout the investigation. A critical assessment of all information, coupled with a commitment to due process for all parties involved, is paramount. Question 16. Performance analysis shows a report of potential fraud involving a private contractor operating a renewable energy project in California, which receives partial funding through a DOE grant program. However, the alleged fraudulent activities also appear to involve violations of state environmental regulations. As a Department of Energy OIG special agent in California, what is the most appropriate initial course of action to ensure strict adherence to jurisdictional requirements? Option A. Dismiss the report as primarily a state environmental matter and take no further action, assuming it falls outside DOE-OIG's purview. Option B. Immediately initiate a full-scale investigation into all aspects of the contractor's operations, assuming DOE-OIG has jurisdiction due to the DOE grant funding. Option C. Focus solely on the aspects of the alleged fraud directly tied to the DOE grant funds, ignoring any potential violations of state environmental regulations. Option D. Conduct a preliminary assessment to determine the extent of DOE's direct involvement and funding of the contractor's operations, and if significant overlap with state environmental regulations is apparent, consult with the relevant California State Environmental Enforcement Agency and potentially the EPA to clarify primary investigative authority before proceeding. The correct answer is D. Conduct a preliminary assessment to determine the extent of DOE's direct involvement and funding of the contractor's operations, and if significant overlap with state environmental regulations is apparent, consult with the relevant California State Environmental Enforcement Agency and potentially the EPA to clarify primary investigative authority before proceeding. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Department of Energy (DOE) Office of Inspector General OIG, special agent in California due to the potential for overlapping investigative jurisdictions and the need to maintain strict adherence to the Inspector General Act of 1978, as amended, and relevant DOE orders. The agent must navigate the complexities of identifying the primary investigative authority to avoid duplication of effort, potential conflicts, and ensure efficient use of government resources. Misinterpreting jurisdiction can lead to wasted time, compromised investigations, and potential legal challenges. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough initial assessment to determine if the alleged misconduct falls within the DOE-OIG's purview, specifically concerning programs and operations funded or administered by the Department of Energy in California. This approach prioritizes confirming the DOE's direct connection to the activity or entity under scrutiny. If the initial assessment indicates the matter is primarily within the jurisdiction of another federal agency, e.g., the Environmental Protection Agency for certain environmental violations, or the Department of Justice for criminal matters unrelated to DOE programs, the agent should then formally consult with the relevant agency's OIG or investigative division to confirm jurisdictional boundaries and facilitate a proper referral. This aligns with the Inspector General Act's mandate for efficient and coordinated oversight and prevents overreach or neglect of DOE-specific responsibilities. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately proceed with a full investigation without first confirming the DOE's primary jurisdictional interest. This fails to acknowledge the possibility of other agencies having a more direct or exclusive investigative mandate, potentially leading to an unauthorized investigation and a waste of DOE-OIG resources. It also bypasses the crucial step of interagency coordination, which is often implied or explicitly required for efficient government oversight. Another incorrect approach is to assume jurisdiction solely based on the location within California, without verifying the specific nature of the activity and its connection to DOE programs or funding. This is a superficial assessment that ignores the substantive basis for DOE OIG jurisdiction, which is tied to the department's mission and operations, not merely geographic presence. A third incorrect approach is to dismiss the matter outright without any attempt to verify potential DOE involvement or to consult with other agencies. This could result in a failure to investigate significant misconduct that does, in fact, fall under the DOE OIG's responsibility, thereby undermining the OIG's mandate to promote economy, efficiency, and integrity within the department. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a systematic approach. First, clearly define the scope of the alleged misconduct. Second, consult internal DOE OIG guidelines and the Inspector General Act to understand the parameters of their jurisdiction. Third, conduct a preliminary assessment to identify any direct nexus to DOE programs, operations, or funding. Fourth, if a potential overlap or primary jurisdiction by another agency is identified, engage in proactive communication and consultation with that agency's OIG or investigative body. This collaborative and evidence-based approach ensures that investigations are conducted by the appropriate authority, resources are used effectively, and the integrity of government oversight is maintained. Question 17. Stakeholder feedback indicates concerns regarding potential misuse of federal funds allocated to a renewable energy initiative in California. As a Department of Energy Office of Inspector General OIG, Special Agent, what is the most appropriate initial course of action when presented with these allegations? Option A. Immediately launch a full-scale, intrusive investigation into the alleged misuse of funds, demanding access to all program records and personnel. Option B. Conduct a preliminary assessment to gather more information and discreetly inform the relevant DOE program office in California about the general nature of the allegations to facilitate cooperation. Option C. Disregard the allegations due to the potential disruption to the vital renewable energy initiative in California and the need to maintain program momentum. Option D. Publicly announce the allegations and the commencement of an investigation to ensure transparency and deter further potential misconduct. The correct answer is B. Conduct a preliminary assessment to gather more information and discreetly inform the relevant DOE program office in California about the general nature of the allegations to facilitate cooperation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the imperative to investigate potential waste, fraud, and abuse within a Department of Energy DOE program against the need to maintain positive working relationships with program beneficiaries and ensure the efficient delivery of public services. Missteps in handling such allegations can lead to damaged trust, hinder future investigations, and potentially disrupt essential energy initiatives in California. Careful judgment is required to ensure the investigation is thorough, impartial, and conducted with appropriate discretion. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves initiating a preliminary assessment to gather sufficient information to determine if a full investigation is warranted, while simultaneously notifying the relevant DOE program office in California of the allegations in a general, non-accusatory manner. This approach is correct because it adheres to the DOE Office of Inspector General OIG mandate to investigate allegations of waste, fraud, and abuse. It also respects due process by not immediately launching a full-blown investigation without preliminary evidence, and it maintains transparency and collaboration with the program office, which can be crucial for obtaining necessary information and ensuring program continuity. This aligns with OIG guidelines that emphasize a risk-based approach to investigations and the importance of stakeholder engagement. Incorrect approach is analysis. Initiating a full, intrusive investigation immediately without any preliminary assessment is professionally unacceptable. This approach bypasses the necessary step of validating allegations and could lead to wasted resources, unnecessary disruption to program operations in California, and potential reputational damage to innocent parties if the allegations prove unfounded. It fails to adhere to efficient investigative practices and could be seen as overly aggressive. Publicly announcing the allegations and the initiation of an investigation without sufficient evidence or a clear investigative plan is also professionally unacceptable. This premature disclosure can prejudice the investigation, create undue public alarm, and damage the reputation of the DOE program and its beneficiaries in California. Violates principles of confidentiality and due process inherent in investigative work. Ignoring the allegations entirely due to concerns about disrupting program operations is professionally unacceptable. The DOE OIG has a statutory duty to investigate all credible allegations of waste, fraud, and abuse. Failing to act on such allegations would be a dereliction of duty and would undermine the OIG's mission to promote economy, efficiency, and integrity within the DOE. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a thorough understanding of the allegations and the relevant regulatory framework. This involves assessing the credibility and specificity of the information received. Next, they should consider the potential impact of different investigative approaches on program operations and stakeholders, while prioritizing the OIG's mandate. A risk-based assessment should guide the decision on whether to proceed with a preliminary assessment or a full investigation. Throughout the process, maintaining confidentiality, adhering to due process, and fostering appropriate communication with relevant parties are paramount to ensuring an effective and ethical outcome. Question 18. Investigation of allegations of fraudulent billing practices by a Department of Energy contractor operating a facility in Texas. What is the most appropriate initial investigative strategy for a DOE OIG special agent? Option A. Leak information about the investigation to a local news outlet to gauge public reaction and potentially encourage whistleblowers. Option B. Conduct preliminary inquiries, including discreetly reviewing publicly available information and interviewing non-suspect personnel to establish reasonable suspicion before employing more intrusive investigative tools. Option C. Immediately issue subpoenas for all financial records of the contractor and its key employees and begin overt surveillance of the facility. Option D. Confront the primary suspect with the allegations and request voluntary production of all relevant documents. The correct answer is B. Conduct preliminary inquiries, including discreetly reviewing publicly available information and interviewing non-suspect personnel to establish reasonable suspicion before employing more intrusive investigative tools. Explanation. Investigation of potential fraud within a Department of Energy DOE contractor facility in Texas presents a professionally challenging scenario due to the inherent complexities of financial investigations, need to maintain the integrity of ongoing operations, and the potential for significant financial and reputational damage to both the government and the contractor. Special agents must balance the imperative to uncover wrongdoing with the requirement to conduct their investigation discreetly and in accordance with established legal and ethical standards, particularly concerning the handling of sensitive information and the rights of individuals involved. The best approach involves a meticulous and legally sound information gathering process that prioritizes the preservation of evidence and adherence to the DOE OIG's investigative protocols and relevant federal statutes. This includes conducting preliminary inquiries to establish reasonable suspicion, followed by the judicious use of investigative tools such as subpoenas for financial records, interviews with key personnel, and, if probable cause is established, the execution of search warrants. All actions must be documented meticulously, and legal counsel from the OIG or Department of Justice should be consulted at critical junctures to ensure compliance with the Fourth Amendment and other legal protections. This methodical, legally grounded approach safeguards the investigation's integrity and ensures that any subsequent actions are defensible. An incorrect approach would be to immediately initiate broad, intrusive surveillance or to confront potential subjects without sufficient preliminary evidence. This could prematurely alert the subjects, leading to the destruction of evidence and compromising the investigation. Furthermore, bypassing established legal procedures for obtaining records or conducting interviews, such as failing to obtain necessary warrants or subpoenas, would constitute a significant regulatory and ethical failure, potentially rendering any gathered evidence inadmissible in court and violating individuals' constitutional rights. Another flawed approach would be to leak information about the investigation to the press or other unauthorized parties. This breaches confidentiality, can prejudice potential jurors, and undermines public trust in the OIG's investigative process, violating ethical standards of discretion and professional conduct. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough assessment of the initial allegations, followed by a phased investigative strategy. This strategy should prioritize legally permissible methods for gathering information, escalating to more intrusive measures only when justified by developing evidence and in consultation with legal advisors. Continuous evaluation of the evidence and adherence to established protocols are paramount to ensuring a thorough, ethical, and legally sound investigation. Question 19. Comparative studies suggest that when a Department of Energy Office of Inspector General Special Agent in California is investigating potential procurement fraud involving a private contractor and believes critical evidence resides on the contractor's internal, password-protected servers, which of the following approaches best adheres to federal investigative standards and constitutional protections? Option A. Ask the contractor's legal counsel for voluntary access to the servers, without any formal documentation of the request or the scope of access. Option B. Obtain a federal search warrant from a U.S. District Court judge based on probable cause, specifying the scope of the search and seizure of digital evidence. Option C. Request a search warrant from a California Superior Court judge, believing state law enforcement procedures are sufficient for federal evidence gathering. Option D. Directly access the contractor's internal network using investigative techniques without obtaining any warrant, assuming the information is vital to the investigation. The correct answer is B. Obtain a federal search warrant from a U.S. District Court judge based on probable cause, specifying the scope of the search and seizure of digital evidence. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential for conflicting interests and the need to maintain the integrity of investigations conducted by the Department of Energy Office of Inspector General, OIG, in California. Special agents must navigate the delicate balance between gathering evidence and respecting the rights and privacy of individuals, particularly when dealing with sensitive information that could have broader implications. The requirement for strict adherence to federal investigative protocols and the specific mandates of the DOE OIG is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a systematic and legally sound approach to evidence collection, prioritizing the preservation of the chain of custody and ensuring all actions are authorized and documented. This approach, which involves obtaining a federal search warrant based on probable cause, is correct because it aligns directly with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and federal statutes governing search and seizure. The DOE OIG operates under federal law, and its agents are empowered to seek federal warrants from federal magistrates or judges. This ensures that any intrusion into private property or seizure of information is judicially authorized, based on a sworn statement demonstrating probable cause, and narrowly tailored to the scope of the investigation. This process safeguards individual rights while providing the legal authority necessary for effective law enforcement. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves directly accessing the company's internal network without prior authorization, even if the agent believes the information is crucial. This violates federal wiretap laws and privacy statutes, as it constitutes unauthorized access to electronic communications and data. Such an action would compromise the integrity of any evidence obtained, rendering it inadmissible in court and potentially leading to civil or criminal penalties for the agent. Another incorrect approach is to rely on a state-level search warrant obtained from a California state court for evidence that will be used in a federal investigation. While state warrants can sometimes be used in federal proceedings under specific circumstances, the DOE OIG is a federal entity investigating potential federal crimes or program fraud. Therefore, the primary and most secure legal avenue for evidence collection in such cases is through federal judicial processes. Relying solely on a state warrant for federal investigative purposes can create jurisdictional complexities and challenges to the admissibility of evidence in federal court. A third incorrect approach is to request the company's cooperation in voluntarily providing the information without establishing a clear legal basis or documenting the request. While voluntary cooperation is ideal, proceeding without a clear understanding of the legal boundaries or without a formal request process can lead to misunderstandings, disputes over the scope of information provided, and potential allegations of coercion. It also bypasses the necessary judicial oversight that ensures the investigation remains within legal and constitutional bounds. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the objective of the investigation and the type of evidence required. This should be followed by a thorough review of applicable federal laws and DOE/OIG policies governing evidence collection. The agent must then assess the legal authority needed to obtain the evidence, considering options such as voluntary consent, administrative subpoenas, or search warrants. In situations involving potential criminal activity or significant program fraud, seeking a federal search warrant based on probable cause is the most robust and legally defensible method. All investigative steps must be meticulously documented, and the chain of custody for all evidence must be rigorously maintained. Question 20. The investigation demonstrates that Intertech Solutions, a contractor operating under a Department of Energy contract in California, has submitted invoices totaling $1,250,000 for services. Preliminary findings suggest that $200,000 of these invoiced costs may be unallowable under Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR Part 31, specifically related to excessive executive bonuses and uncompensated consultant fees. If the contract's profit rate on allowable costs is 15%, what is the total amount of potential government overpayment, including profit on unallowable costs, that special agents should seek to recover? Option A, $1,050,000. Option B, $170,000. Option C, $200,000. Option D, $230,000. The correct answer is C, $200,000. Explanation: the investigation demonstrates a scenario where a contractor, Intertech Solutions, has submitted invoices for services rendered under a Department of Energy (DOE) contract in California. The core challenge lies in accurately assessing the financial impact of Intertech's alleged overbilling, which requires a precise calculation of the difference between the billed amounts and the contractually allowable costs, considering specific cost principles and potential penalties. This requires meticulous attention to detail, a thorough understanding of federal acquisition regulations, and the ability to apply financial analysis techniques to determine the extent of potential government loss. The correct approach involves a detailed, line-item reconciliation of Intertech's invoices against the contract's terms and the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR cost principles applicable to the contract. This includes identifying any disallowed costs, e.g., entertainment, lobbying, excessive overhead, and calculating the precise amount of overpayment. The calculation should be performed using a structured methodology, such as total billed amount allowable costs equals potential government overpayment, where allowable costs are determined by applying FAR Part 31, contract cost principles and procedures, to the contractor's submitted costs. For instance, if Intertech billed $1,000,000 and the investigation reveals $150,000 in disallowed costs under FAR 31, 205 e.g. $50,000 for unallowable travel and $100,000 for excessive executive compensation, the calculation would be $1,000,000,000, $150,000 equals $150,000. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the financial discrepancy by adhering to the established regulatory framework for determining allowable costs on federal contracts. It quantifies the potential loss with precision, providing a defensible basis for any recovery actions. An approach that relies solely on a percentage reduction of the total invoice amount, without specific cost-based justification, is incorrect. This method lacks regulatory grounding and fails to identify the specific FAR violations. For example, arbitrarily reducing invoices by 10% without analyzing the nature of the costs would not accurately reflect the actual overpayment and could lead to either under or over recovery. Another incorrect approach would be to focus only on the contractor's profit margin without considering the allowability of the underlying costs. While profit is a factor in contract negotiation, the primary concern for the OIG is the recovery of funds paid for unallowable costs, as defined by federal regulations. Simply calculating profit on disallowed costs does not address the fundamental issue of whether those costs should have been reimbursed by the government in the first place. Finally, An approach that ignores the specific contract terms and relies on industry best practices alone is insufficient. While industry standards can provide context, federal contracts are governed by specific FAR clauses and cost principles that are legally binding. Deviating from these specific requirements to rely on general industry norms would not provide the necessary regulatory justification for any financial claims. The professional reasoning process should involve 1. Understanding the contract scope and applicable FAR provisions. 2. Conducting a detailed cost reconciliation analysis, identifying specific disallowed costs and their regulatory basis. 3. Quantifying the financial impact using precise calculations. 4. Documenting all findings and calculations meticulously. 5. Consulting with legal counsel and financial experts as needed to ensure accuracy and compliance.